I looked at her for a long minute. She radiated such calmness from this woman whose last name I didn't even know. Krista, listen, I hate to say this, but I don't even know your last name, and McDougal, I'm Krista McDougal. I understand these two surnames don't really suit each other, do they? My mom is German and my dad, well, he was Irish. I was named after my mother's mother, who died during World War II. Okay, Krista McDougal, why are you trying to be so nice to me? Other than drinking coffee and booking meeting rooms, we barely even spoke. Because you look so sad. I know you've been working really hard these last few months. You're always there and always nice to everyone, even when you must have been exhausted. So, I'm just trying to be nice to you when you look like you need it. Well, you're right. I'm sad and confused and angry and... Do you really want to hear a very sad and, it seems to me, a very strange story? I hear you say that you really need to tell it, so yes, I want to hear it. So I told my story again, for the third time that day, and this time I felt like I finally got catharsis from my story. When I finished, Krista, my new friend Krista, looked at me for quite a long time. Lustful cockroaches? She burst out laughing. I joined her, and we probably sounded hysterical, or at least that's what I thought. Bobby, this is terrible, and the story is terribly strange. There must be something seriously wrong with your wife. Yes, I think so too, but apart from preparing for the divorce, I don't know what else to do. Now, I don't want to go home and listen to her idiocy, so I'm kind of stuck. More thoughts on the other side of my desk. Bobby, I have an idea, just an idea for now. Come home with me and have dinner with my daughter, Mom, and me. I'll make great pasta with... Krista, it's Friday night, and I'm willing to bet big money that you won't cook anything special. How old is your daughter? 11. Do you all want to go to fast food? McDonald's maybe, or... Chick-fil-A, actually. Dana, my daughter, loves their chocolate milkshakes. She and I go and leave Mom to watch TV. She records TV shows during the week and then watches them when Dana and I are not there. Okay, my new friend Krista, let's take our cars and I'll follow you home to your place and then we'll head to Chick-fil-A. That's what we did. Being with Krista and Dana actually lifted my spirits. Dana had just finished elementary school and was heading to high school in the fall. She was proud of her excellent grades, as was Krista. It was calm for me to just sit and listen to their conversation between mother and daughter, relaxing and sad at the same time. Krista, of course, noticed this and did her best to involve me in the conversation. Bobby, how long have you been running? Everyone at the company knows that you run in the morning before coming to the office. How far do you run each week? Did you run track at USC? Well, yes, I ran at UGA, on the cross-country team in the fall and track and field in the spring. Truth be told, I wasn't good enough to run on an NCAA team, especially a Division I team like Georgia, but the coaches liked me. They liked my work ethic and let me run. I didn't even place in any of the races, but being on these teams was a great experience. I'm called a scholarship athlete, which doesn't mean much, but I get great seats at Georgia football games. Wait, Mr. Bobby. Did you go to Georgia, play on Georgia teams, and go to Georgia football games? I love Georgia. Mom says that I can go there if I study well, because I will receive a Nadezhda scholarship, which will pay for everything. Dana, you're right. The Hope Scholarship is a wonderful thing. You just have to keep studying to qualify. I know. Mom tells me this almost every day. This was said by an 11-year-old child. Quite mature. How do it seem? And it's quite smart of her mom to push her to get good grades. We're still a little. We talked about school and Macon Beacon, our local minor league baseball team. And Krista frowned and talked about the upcoming concert in Atlanta. Apparently there was some kind of promise to go there if a particular little girl got an A on her report card. Mom is fidgeting a little now. Well, ladies, I interrupted before the fidgeting and frowning intensified. I have to go. Thanks for including me in your dinner plans. The chicken was good, but the company was much, much better. You two have made my day so much better, and I thank you for that. Dana, it was nice meeting you. Krista McDougal, I'll see you on Monday, and I just want to say, I love your last name. Hope you both have a good weekend. As I was leaving, I heard Dana ask her mother, "Your last name? What is he talking about, Mom?" That made me chuckle. However, the grin disappeared when I returned home. Janet was waiting there, ready to nag me for not coming home at the appointed time. I got ahead of her. "Janet," I said, entering the house, "don't even start. I needed to be with myself. Unless you're ready to tell me you've canceled your plans to cheat next week, I don't even want to be in the same room with you." "Well, Bobby, I think I have some good news that you would have known about by now if you had come home at a decent hour." Okay, she was starting to dig herself in, but I was interested in hearing what good news she might have, so I asked her to continue. "I talked to James today. I talked to the teacher, and I told him that you were very upset about the course next week." "Tell me straight. That next week you will have sex with another man," I chimed in with my own dig. "God, Bobby, please. You have one opinion and I have another. But I really love you and I want to do what's best for us, so the teacher and I came to a compromise. He keeps the deposit for himself and I go to class on the first day. At the end of the day, he and I decide whether I will come to class again. If one of us, he or I, considers that additional lessons will not bring me any benefit, I will not pay him the remaining money and will not come for further lessons. Isn't that a compromise you can live with?" "Janet, I think this whole idea is just an excuse for you to have sex with another man, and even pay for it. I know you don't agree, so I have an idea. Let's call your mom and ask what she thinks about your idea." "Huh? Bobby, you know your mom and dad? They believe that advanced algebra borders on sinfulness. Any kind of sex education is forbidden in the Bible about 40 times, at least that's how they read it. Then no, it does not make sense. How about another thing? We don't talk about this anymore until Monday evening. And I promise to tell you everything on Monday. If you think it's no use, if I haven't learned anything, if you promise to be truly objective and say, I shouldn't go back there, then I won't. But you must promise to be objective. Agreed?" I just shook my head and left. Another night in the guest room and an early rise on Saturday morning for a long run, this time nice when it wasn't too hot yet and quite slow until I warmed up. Then a few quick bursts in a row. Not my student days, but not bad for a 40-year-old lawyer. Came back into the house to take a shower. Janet still hadn't gotten up, so I left the house to go where? Not to the office. I've seen enough of this place lately. Without any plans, without intention, without, hell, of course I intended to do this. I parked in front of Krista's house and rang the doorbell. "I'll open it now," I heard Krista's voice from inside. The door opened and there she stood, her face covered in grease stains, her hair pulled back under a white cap, her hands wearing strange-looking gloves, and yet she looked absolutely beautiful. But her voice was not like that. "Bobby, what the hell?" "I was cleaning the oven. You can't." "Mom, come here quickly." She ran somewhere back into the house. As I stood there realizing that I had made a huge mistake, an elderly woman appeared. "I'm Mrs. McDougal," the woman said, "and you must be Bobby. Come in and sit down. You did something down there in Georgia and my granddaughter thinks you could walk on water. My daughter probably thought the same thing last night, but now you're coming here when she's not ready yet? Woohoo. Big mistake, mister." "You're right, Mrs. McDougal. I feel very stupid. You can't just tell her I'm sorry and that I'll call her later, or maybe just see her on Monday." "No, sir. You shit on the floor. Now stay and clean it up. She ran off to get herself in order, and you were polite enough to wait for her, give her the right compliments, and explain yourself that you are sorry. Is it clear?" "Yes, ma'am, you're right. I'll wait for her. Is Dana here?" While I waited, I could talk to her. "No, Dana is playing football, and Krista should pick her up in about an hour." "Okay, I'll just sit quietly." She said as she left. I felt like an absolute idiot and wanted to sneak away and never look at Krista again. But then she came back into the living room and I was glad I stayed. Her headdress and gloves were gone. She had time to wash her face and even put on her makeup, put on lipstick and change clothes. Of course, she looked great. She had been working at Bingham, Carlton, and Quick, for at least a year without me even noticing. Maybe I just never looked at it. My mistake. Bobby. Krista, wait, please. Let me tell you how sorry I am for bursting in without calling. I feel very stupid for my idiocy, and especially for confusing you. You should know, I met your mom, and she scolded me a little, and I deserved it all. Yeah, she's pretty good at that. I don't know why you're here, and I felt pretty awkward when I opened the door. I started to interrupt, but she continued, "Wait, Bobby, let me finish. This morning, Dana is playing football. How about we go to the football field together? We can watch her play, and you can tell us why you came this morning." Okay, it's okay. And again, I'm sorry for putting you in an awkward position. It was terribly rude of me. Yes, it was. But now let's leave it in the past and go watch football. And so we did. We went to see Dana play. Pretty good, but not great. During the game, Krista and I had time to talk. Well, I did most of the talking, and she made sympathetic sounds. After listening to me croak and whine about Janet for a while and the game was already ending, Krista interrupted my monologue. "Bobby, you need to fish or take off the bait." You understand what this means, right? I shrugged slightly, and she tried another aphorism. "You need to do something or go out from toilet." God, Bobby. You either have to accept what she says she's going to do, which I know you don't want, or tell her in your sternest, angriest voice that if she goes through with it, you'll file for divorce next week, and you have to make her believe it. That's how our conversation ended. Dana came running with the joyful glow of an 11-year-old child who had won the game. I offered to invite them to lunch, but Krista quickly declined. "Work from home for both of them," she said. I dropped them off at their townhouse and headed to... where else? The office. I couldn't face Janet. I'd already run out that day. I didn't want to call my friends, which would lead to awkward questions, and I didn't want to go to the bar. So I sat in my office and thought. A draft divorce petition arrived from Elizabeth by email. I looked it over, sent her a few nagging comments, and finally went home. Janet was preparing dinner when I walked in. She said hello and didn't talk about the elephant in the room, and neither did I. We had dinner together, talked politely about the weather and the school year, in general, meaningless chatter. I cleaned it up after dinner as she had prepared everything. When I finished, she was watching something on TV. I ignored her and headed to my office. "Bobby, would you like to watch a movie on TV with me? No, Janet. We have a huge elephant in the room, and until we solve it, I'm not very comfortable sitting next to you. Next week, we will make a decision. Either you stop your plan to cheat, or if you go through with it, I will file for divorce." I went further to my office. Later, I went to bed, again in the guest room. I didn't sleep very well, but that didn't surprise me. The next day, Sunday, I went to exercise, and then, at breakfast alone, not bothering Krista or wanting to see my wife that day. Luckily, Makonbakan were playing at home that day, so I went to their game. They lost, but I had a good time immersing myself in the atmosphere of the game for a while. Eventually, the game ended, and I slowly, reluctantly headed home. I thought about staying at a motel, but I wanted to give Janet one last chance to save our marriage. No dinner together. I don't know if she ate at all. Finally, I made a sandwich and sat in my office until I was so tired that I went to bed. As I headed to the spare bedroom, Janet came up to me. "Bobby, I just want you to know that tomorrow everything will be over. When you get home from work, we can sit down and talk, and you, not me, but you, can decide whether I should come back for more instructions on Wednesday. Janet, we're just going in circles. Tomorrow you will cheat on me, and for some reason you don't see it. Your cheating will end our marriage, and you just don't see that either. Bobby, no, I promise, you'll see. Tomorrow everything will be better. Crazy, well, that is, really mentally ill? Or did she just go crazy because of some other man? Or amazed by real lustful cockroaches? Who the hell knows? I felt like she was driving me crazy. I didn't answer and went to bed. Monday began with a phone call to Elizabeth to assure that Janet would be followed by a private investigator if she attended the instruction. I went to work, but didn't expect to be able to do anything real. I sat at my desk, literally staring at my phone, waiting for a call from a private investigator. Just before noon, the phone did ring, but it was from Elizabeth, the divorce lawyer, not the private investigator. Bobby, a private investigator called me a few minutes ago and said that he followed your wife to a house on Laramie Drive. She entered the house about an hour ago and still hasn't come out. This private investigator is also an employee of the court and will be able to serve her divorce papers in this house if you want me to tell him to do so. Elizabeth, thank you for your message. I simply have no choice. Please let her get the documents. Can a private investigator record this delivery? Well, I'd like to see her reaction, if possible. I'm sure the private investigator has a video camera. I'll tell him to write it all down and I'll email it to you later today. Thank you, Elizabeth. Let me know when I owe you more for your fee or the private investigator's fee. Don't worry. Take care of yourself now. Later that day, the video did arrive, attached to the email. Watching it on my laptop, I felt only sadness. No anger, but no tears either. The camera must have been attached to the private investigator's breast pocket. It all started when he knocked on the door. Finally, the door was opened by a tall, handsome, fit guy, dressed in a robe and looking disheveled. "What's the matter?" the guy shouted to the private investigator. "I need to talk to Mrs. Janet Thomas," he replied. "What? There is no one here with that name." "Listen carefully," answered the private detective. "I am a sworn officer of the Superior Court of Macon-Bibb County, and I know that Mrs. Thomas is in this house. Inform her that she must appear before me or suffer the consequences." Wow, I thought, I have to admire him. Everything he says is absolutely true and completely meaningless, but the idiot who answered the door obviously doesn't know that. Okay, wait a minute. I'll try to find her. He disappeared from the camera's view and returned to the house. Then, to my eternal sadness, Janet appeared at the door, also in a dressing gown and also disheveled. "I'm Janet Thomas. Why are you looking for me?" she said. "Ma'am, can I see your documents?" asked the private detective. Wait a minute. She disappeared into the house and reappeared a few minutes later. "Here's my driver's license. Now tell me who you are and why you need me." The private investigator held the driver's license up to the camera and then handed it back along with a folder of documents. "Janet Thomas, you have been served with a petition for divorce and accompanying documents. You are advised to consult with an attorney of your choice." Janet collapsed to the floor. The video stayed on long enough to focus on her lying on the floor and then went dark. I must have passed out too, because I didn't move until I finally looked up and saw Krista standing in front of my desk. "Bobby, she did it, didn't she? Oh, you poor dear. What? Oh, I don't know. I don't even know what to tell you. You can come to my house for dinner if you want. My mom cooked something, so it must be delicious. I know Dana will be glad to see you." "Thank you, Krista, but I won't be good company for anyone. But can I use the invitation later?" "Of course you can. You can come anytime. Just don't forget to call first." The last part was said with a tiny grin. In response, I also grinned. "Thank you, Krista. I really mean it. See you tomorrow." Fine. She left, and I was left sitting there, feeling sorry for myself, and even, believe it or not, feeling sorry for Janet. Whatever she wanted to get out of her sex education, I knew it wouldn't be a divorce petition. I ended up going to a nearby hotel to spend the night. Janet called me on my cell phone several times, but I didn't answer and turned off the phone. Long night, little sleep. A run the next morning that didn't help me at all. This is how my life went for the next few weeks. I returned to the house, making sure Janet had gone to get some clothes and other things I needed. I found myself an apartment, quite nice and close to work. I didn't talk to Janet at all, didn't even see her until our divorce hearing. Elizabeth and I sat at one table, Janet and her lawyer, the young guy Elizabeth greeted, sat at another. I looked around the courtroom and noticed the man with the video. Elizabeth pointed to him. She shrugged and told me not to worry. I am not a trial lawyer, so being in court is a rarity for me. The bailiff called for everyone to stand. We stood, and the judge walked in, an older woman in a black robe, already going through papers as she sat down at her elevated desk. Lawyers, Thomas vs. Thomas, are you both ready to get started? They both answered in the affirmative, and she continued, Miss Jenkins, as the plaintiff's lawyer, you speak first, and I remind both lawyers. No theatrics. There is no jury here, so showing up won't help you and could get you in trouble. Clear? They both said yes again, and the judge nodded to Elizabeth. Your Honor, this is a direct claim for divorce based on Mrs. Thomas's adultery. Mr. Thomas, my client, is not asking or offering any alimony. There are no children. The marital home is rented, savings will be split 50-50, and both parties will keep their own retirement accounts. Everything is as stated in the statement of claim. She sat down. Thank you, lawyer. Delightfully brief. I always appreciate this. Mr. Graham, as counsel for the defendant, do you have an answer? Yes, Your Honor. My client denies the charge of adultery, and we are prepared to present evidence that no adultery occurred, neither in the form and place alleged in the plaintiff's statement, nor at any other time. What is your evidence? Asked the judge. With your permission, Your Honor, I would like to call a witness. Of course, it should be interesting. Your Honor, I call James Power to testify. Of course, the guy with the video stood up and approached the dock. He was sworn in and sat in the witness chair. Janet's lawyer tried to portray him as a sex education expert. Mr. Power, please tell the court about your relationship with Mrs. Janet Thomas. I was hired by Mrs. Thomas for educational purposes to conduct a short-term course in sexual techniques to improve her and her husband's sexual responses to each other. Do you have the right to teach sexuality education courses? Yes, by the California Board of Sex Education, from which I have a diploma. And do you charge for these courses? Yes. My standard fee is $1,000 for a 3-day course. In Ms. Thomas's case, she told me that her husband objected to the course. So I adjusted the curriculum to start with only 1 day of instruction in exchange for her $500 deposit. Does this 1 day of training include sexual contact? No, ma'am, no. Mrs. Thomas received the divorce petition before we even got to the actual sexual intercourse. She was so upset by the divorce filing that we no longer met for additional training. Thank you, Mr. Power. I have no more questions. The judge turned to Elizabeth. Counselor, do you have any questions for this witness? Yes, Your Honor, several. Getting up, Elizabeth whispered to me. You might like it. Addressing the witness, she continued. Mr. Stringowitz, can I call you that since that's your real name, right? Well, my name is Power, which is Stangowitz, which is the name I had when I was born, but I don't use it anymore. Did you stop using it because that name is on your arrest report? I object, Your Honor. Janet's lawyer jumped up and began to speak further, but the judge raised her hand. Miss Jenkins, I am inclined to agree with Mr. Graham. How might this be relevant? Your Honor, this is relevant in 2 respects. First, as you know, a criminal conviction affects the reliability of a witness's testimony. Second, Mr. Stringowitz's criminal conviction stems from an adultery charge. You can continue, but you should know that I doubt the appropriateness of this. Yes, ma'am, thank you. So, Mr. Stringowitz, please tell the court how many times and for what offenses you have been convicted, specifically in the state of California. He looked at Janet's lawyer for help, but was left alone. Well, it was, an accusation of receiving money for sex, he finally whispered, as if that would help. Mr. Stringowitz, you said that you were arrested on charges of receiving money for sex in the state of California? Well, yes, and how many times have you been convicted, either pleading guilty or being found guilty, of pimping or similar charges of receiving money for sex? Do you agree that this number is at least 24? Your Honor, the plaintiff's lawyer is nudging the witness. I object, Janet's lawyer said. Mr. Graham, as you know, as you should know, the plaintiff's lawyer is cross-examining your witness, and has the right to ask leading questions. Carry on, Miss Jenkins. Thank you, Your Honor. So, Mr. Stringowitz, there are at least 24 convictions for sex for money. This is right? Well, some of them were just, please, Mr. Stringowitz, yes or no? Okay, then yes. Thank you. As for your certificate from the Council on Sex Education, how many hours of classroom training did you attend to obtain it? Well, there weren't really any activities in class. You see, I earned my degree mostly through practice. Do you mean on-the-job training? So, did you have sex with students or potential students? Yes, that's how they learn, you know. Certainly. Moving on to your meeting with Mrs. Thomas, did you pre-qualify her for your sex education course? Yes, I did it. It's standard procedure. And what methods did you use for its preliminary selection? Well, in simple terms, it was non-penetrative sex so that I could gauge her level of experience and how comfortable she felt with these sexual acts. Thank you, Mr. Stringowitz, for the most informative series of answers. Your Honor, although unusual, I hope you will allow me to briefly summarize Mr. Stringowitz's testimony. I think this will be helpful for both my client and the defendant. Go ahead, Miss Jenkins. Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Thomas, Elizabeth said and turned to Janet, and Mrs. Thomas, in his testimony, Mr. Stringowitz admits that he is a convicted man on charges of receiving money for sex with a meaningless diploma to whom Mrs. Thomas paid $500 for sex with her under the guise of education. Unfortunately for Mrs. Thomas, despite the disguise, sex for money in Georgia is still a crime for which Mr. Stringowitz can be arrested as the performer and Mrs. Thomas as his client. Adultery in Georgia does not have to involve what is called penetrative sex. In Georgia's definition of adultery, sex as Mr. Stringowitz described it certainly counts as sex. Therefore, I am afraid that Mrs. Thomas is in fact guilty of adultery. Your Honor, I have no further questions for this witness. Miss Jenkins, you have skillfully stated your position. Mr. Graham, do you have an answer for the accused? Your Honor, may we take a short break to consider Ms. Jenkins's arguments? The judge actually called a break, and the hearing dragged on for some time. But Elizabeth clearly won. She later told me that it was quite easy to get information about Stringowitz. He got kicked out of California for running his scams on too many stupid women, especially married ones. Janet was one of many. Speaking of Janet, as we left the courtroom, I heard her complain to her lawyer, "But I didn't even have sex with that asshole." The divorce was granted on essentially the same terms that Elizabeth presented to the judge. Janet was never arrested for her role in the relationship with Stringowitz, but he was accused of receiving money for sex, and given the choice of leaving Georgia immediately or spending 90 days in the county jail. Of course, he decided to leave, probably hoping to find a better place for his sex scam. I later learned that he made the mistake of driving through the small town where Janet's family lived. I didn't hear whether he managed to get out of the city. Krista and I dated, tried to start a serious relationship, but nothing worked out. I liked her mom and little daughter better than Krista, and I think she was able to understand that. But we became friends, and we still remain so. I got my big bonus and became a partner. But then John Thompson, a shopping center client of mine in Nashville, made me an offer I couldn't refuse. He was sufficiently impressed with my work on his project in Macon that he offered me a full-time position at his headquarters in Nashville with equity in his new projects. More risk than staying at a law firm, but as it turns out, much more reward. About a year after the divorce, I heard from Janet's mom. She got my number in Nashville from my old law firm and called to tell me Janet had died. After her divorce, she returned to southern Georgia and lived with her parents. She started having headaches, and when she went to the doctor, she was diagnosed with a huge brain tumor. A few weeks later, she died. A few months after I learned of Janet's death, I was in Tallahassee, Florida, exploring a potential location for a shopping center. I decided to stop by her family's small town and pay my respects at her grave. There, I found a tombstone. It looked like it had just been installed. On it were the dates of her birth and death, as well as the inscription, Janet Thomas, beloved daughter and loving wife. This made me retreat. I stood there, lost, remembering my time with Janet. So many good times and such a terrible ending. Could her madness be caused by a brain tumor? I think so, because brain tumors exist and lustful cockroaches. No. I was ready to accept the inscription on the grave. After all, it had been true for almost our entire life together. I felt better. I began to feel better about myself and my future, remembering my loving wife. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.